Mr. Andy Stewart.
Oh, and the pipes are ringing and the kilts are swinging and your heart is singing as you gaily march along. You hear the story that is brave and roary in the tunes of glory of an old Scots song. If you're standing near them and you will...
Andy Stewart is arguably Scotland's greatest ever entertainer.
He was the biggest thing in Scottish music after Harry Lauder.
It just was the complete Scottish minstrel.
Entertainer in Scotland, numero uno.
Is the story in the tunes of glory.
Andy Stewart was born in Glasgow in 1933 and moved to Arbroath aged 12.
Well, we were a very close family. You must remember that I was 7 when the war began, and it was like living in a bubble. The 4 of us together, we were very close, a very, very close family. My father was a musician, and he was a bit of a show-off as well. We all had a bit of the histrionic touch. We had no inhibitions right from a very early age. He enjoyed singing and performing, and my father encouraged him.
Even at school, Andy showed that he had a talent for entertaining and mimicry.
I was only belted 3 times at school, and twice it was for doing impressions. I can remember being caught doing an impression of our mathematics teacher. And he it was whom I heard doing the classic. Now, boys, this is a very difficult proposition. Watch the board while I run through it.
Andy's parents supported his ambition to perform, and in 1951 he went to the Glasgow College of Dramatic Art, where he met a fellow student called John Cairney.
He was a wee cheeky fellow from Arbroath, and I was a skinny element from Parkhead. But funnily enough, we got on well right from the start.
We met at Drama College, and it was one very late night. We were going home, and he was standing at one side of the street, and I was standing at the other. And that was the first time ever I heard Andy sing, and he sang The Bonnie Lass of Ballochmyle.
I think she was my girlfriend first, Sheila, and he stole her from me.
Andy married Sheila in 1955 after they had both graduated from Drama College. Despite being trained as a serious actor, Andy fell into the role of an entertainer and mimic on stage and radio.
Hello, good evening, how are you? And welcome to Sunday night at the London Palladium. Isn't it marvellous?
He was essentially an actor, and he acted the part of a comedian.
While working on a radio show at BBC Scotland, Andy had a chance meeting that would change his career forever.
I was booked for the White Heather Club on the gents' toilet here. The gentleman who was producing it at that time, Ian McFadden, was producing me in radio, and he said, I'm starting this show called the White Heather Club, and I'm afraid there's no place in it for you, Andy, because, you know, I was an impressionist at that time, and he said to me, you know, I know you do comedy voices and all the rest of it. What we're looking for is somebody who can do birthday ballads. Now, I know there are all these apocryphal stories, like when you go for a part in a western, they say, can you ride a horse? And whether you've never seen a horse in your life, you say, yes. But I, in actual fact, with a great deal of veracity, said, well, I can sing some birthday ballads. He said, sing one for me now. And my goodness me, there were people in cubicles who'd forgotten what they went in there for. And I sang a wee, perhaps unsuitable for a gent's toilet, I sang a song called The Muck and a Geordie's Fire. Whereupon we passed around the shovels and the sawdust, and I got the job.
Good evening, and welcome to the opening of the White Heather Club. And I'm quite sure, if you care to stay with us, enjoy a wee neck toot. So come on inside and hear Ian Powley and his band playing The Gay Ghosts. Funny. We would like to pinpoint a town or district in Scotland. I'll give you a clue. Have you guessed? Our broth. And we'd also like to pinpoint a personality from our broth, and here he is, Andy Stewart.
When I went to Loch and I think in the scene when nobody run come over the clean and clapped themselves right up to the inn at the muck and the Geordie's fire. We Robbie the Rocky and Willie the Do, the old way for Sale, Bantini McCrew, and nobody else that could lave off the blue at the muck and the Geordie's fire.
After only a year, the now kilted Andy took over as host and turned the White Heather Club into a hit network show, drawing millions of viewers.
Come in, it's nice to see ya. How's yourself, you're looking grand. Take your ease, we'll try to please ya. Man, you're welcome, here's my hand. In the land called Caledonia, there are certain words you say.
In his other TV shows of the time, Andy was able to show off his skills as a mimic and character actor.
3.5 hours late. Maybe she's missed her bus.
I've never been in here afore. It's fine, but strange to see. And no other way it looks when you see it on TV.
I met Andy on the White Heather Club.
The sweetest hours that e'er I spent were spent among the lasses.
You know, that's what I was hoping you would say.
Andy was a very introspective person as well. You know, he was very well read, Andy, and very erudite. And he, because he knew I was interested in books as well, we had conversations. But he amazed me, first of all, with his knowledge of Burns.
A share is 3 times 3 makes 9. I see by ilka score and line, this chap will dearly lure kind. Say leaves me on the road.
Poetry was never far from Andy's mind, and he wrote down ideas for songs and poems on his many travels.
He was always creative. I mean, the guy obviously had a really good brain and he was creative all the time. And he was just writing stuff, you know, lines for songs and bits, scraps and pieces, which he would obviously collate at a later date into either a poem or a song.
In 1960, Andy began as a recording artist for Top Rank International. His first release of Donald Where's Your Troosers didn't sell that well, but the follow-up was a very different story.
Andy Stewart actually got me chucked out a pub because sadly not everybody shares my taste in music, and I went into a pub and I saw one of these digital jukeboxes, and joy of joys, one of the artists who was on it, next to Chumbawamba and Labyrinth or whatever, was Scotland's very own Andy Stewart, and I just put on his haunting ballad, A Scottish Soldier. And if only I could say that we all just kind of gathered arms in the pub and everybody just hummed along to A Scottish Soldier. Sadly, we didn't ever get chased out of the place with a guy with a pool cue.
A Scottish Soldier was not just a hit in the UK, it was #1 in Canada, Australia and New Zealand, and stayed in the US top 50 for over a year, something that today's recording artists can only dream of.
I wish I could say that that was written somewhere in pensive solitude. It was written in a pub in Byers Road, and this night I sat down and the tune of the Green Hills came to me and the line came to me. One can only say an inspiration, I suppose, as I think all songwriting is, and I wrote down there was a soldier, a Scottish soldier, and wrote 2 verses and sang it the next day.
They are not the hills
Of course, we were watching the White Heather show, and this song came on, Andy singing Scottish Soldier. And I remember thinking, oh my God, that's going to be a monster. And sure enough, it was phenomenal. And it took off not only in the UK, but all over the world.
And what do you think is the secret of its phenomenal success, Scottish Soldier?
Oh, I think if I could tell you that, and you could bottle it, we could make a fortune selling it. I don't think you can tell what is the secret of success ever in so many words. I think it's an intangible thing.
He was fortunate, if you like, early on in his career to have the hit record, but he was only fortunate because he wrote the thing.
Don't you ever get tired of A Scottish Soldier?
No, I don't. I hear that lovely money falling all around me.
It's amazing to think that only 25 years ago, before the great Puritan revival of 1971, certain television performers actually appeared on the screen wearing kilts. Andy Stewart's naked knees were featured regularly.
The one time I did Andy Stewart was the one with the ever-lengthening kilt. And that went down very, very well. Arthur Blake at the piano. And yes, it was very, very funny. And I think it was there was a soldier, a Scottish soldier.
Who wandered far away and soldiered far away. There was none bolder with good broad shoulder. He'd fought in many a fray. And fought and won. He'd seen the glory. He'd told the story of battles glorious and deeds victorious. But now he's sighing, his heart is crying.
Yes, that was a wicked takeoff, really.
Another show breaking new ground at the time was Tonight.
Good evening. One of the big awkward questions which everybody is trying
The Tonight programme, for those who can remember it, was the magazine programme, and it set standards, I think, which have never been surpassed.
And now, let's finish up with something a bit brighter. Robert Hall and Jimmy McGregor, football crazy, I think.
Oh, you all know my wee brother. His name is...
Robin and I sung on it 5 nights a week for about 4 years. And we used to sit in the green room. The White Heather Club would be on. They would turn the sound down. The Tonight programme was run by really highly sophisticated people, all Oxbridge, and absolutely top-notch journalists. They'd come from paper journalism into television. And they just thought the White Heather Club was a big joke. They just thought it was so couthy and old-fashioned and archaic and comic. And they used to sit in the green room with the sound switched off and kind of have a giggle at Andy twiddling his kilt and stuff like that. And I have to confess that Robin and I joined in.
There's the swirl of the kilt and the skirl of the pipes and the lilting accordion.
Andy eventually gave up hosting the White Heather Club to concentrate on touring, giving Jimmy McGregor an awkward decision to make.
Andy had become really big, and suddenly we were offered the job as host of the White Heather Club, of this programme that we'd been kind of sitting giggling about. So, but it was a tremendous gig, the White Heather Club. I mean, it had huge viewing figures in England, and when it was off the air in the summer, we took it out as a touring variety show, and we filled theatres from Brighton to Shetland. It was fantastic. Incredible support it got.
After the success of the White Heather Club, in spite of me, it was a success, and I was asked down to London to make some programmes.
I've just come down from the Isle of Skye. I'm no very big and I'm awful shy, and the lasses shout when I go by. Hey, darling, where's your trousers?
As his television career made him a household name in the UK, it was his touring that made him a global star. The massive Scottish diaspora, many of whom were desperately homesick, flocked to see Andy's sellout shows all over the world. In 1964, Andy bought the business of White Heather Tours and turned impresario, as well as still being a regular performer himself. He ran the hugely successful touring shows for 18 years, hiring Scottish artists such as Joe Gordon and Sally Logan, the Alexander Brothers and Stanley Baxter.
The last time I saw Andy, I was working for him. He had taken over the White Heather Tour, and I had decided to do my final tour of Canada and America, largely because I heard that we'd be playing Carnegie Hall. And I thought, oh, that I've got to do. So when Andy turned up, I said, well, what are you doing here? He said, well, I run the White Heather Club now. I said, oh, you've done awfully well.
Later that year, while performing in a run of shows at His Majesty's Theatre in Aberdeen, Andy hit the headlines when he and Sally Logan agreed to perform at the World's Fair in New York.
Wonderful experience, outdoor, thousands of people there. And we went for a day, basically. A car came for us to the theatre in Aberdeen after the show on the Saturday night and drove us to Prestwick. We arrived at the airport, I think it was called Idlewild Airport, and I think it became JFK. We were then taken by car to the venue, and I did about 20 minutes of an act, and Andy went on and did an hour of an act.
then he came off stage and everything was packed for him, and we just got in a car again and drove to the airport, back on the plane, and arrived at Prestwick. Car took us to Aberdeen, and we were on stage that night. I do remember feeling quite odd when I was on stage that night.
I think it was about 64, 65. We did the tour in North America with Andy. And he was so good to us because he allowed us to close the first half, which is a prime spot, you know. And the business was phenomenal. It was so huge. Oh, it was so well liked, you know, unbelievable. We played the Carnegie Hall 2 nights, complete sellout.
Andy was on top of the world really, because he was in Australia, New Zealand, and to come back and do Canada and America. He was on the road, he wanted to go. He loved meeting people, and he loved going to the different countries.
Oh, Campbellton Law, I wish you were whiskey, Campbellton Law, oh, hi. Oh, Campbellton Law, I wish you were whiskey, I would drink it dry.
Andy had frequent health issues, which were often picked up in the press. Despite this, his schedule would regularly involve spring, summer and autumn tours of Canada, America, Australia, South Africa and New Zealand.
How are you generally, your health? You had some strange stories.
Did you get the latest story from Australia? The whole tour was cancelled. Oh, I'm glad of that, because that was published in Scotland. We phoned the family home about, I was taken to Brisbane General Hospital, not General Hospital, one of the hospitals in Brisbane, and I had to be, I had to have my plumbing temporarily sorted out, and the report went back to Britain that I was stricken once again, and that I wouldn't be I'd be probably coming home encased in lead or something like that. But no, I can't honestly say that I'm 100% certain of what my interior is going to do next, but I'm fairly healthy apart from that.
One way to sort of cut down the wear and tear on the old system would be to knock off this strenuous touring you seem to go in for.
That's right, it would be, but on the other hand, it's a terribly satisfying way of life.
Is that the time? Already? Well, it must be, because that's the song, and when you play that song, then it's time.
Back in the UK, Andy was now synonymous with Hogmanay, and for over 20 years he brought in the bells with a TV audience of up to 13 million viewers.
Where are you going? On the way for a pint. Oh, well, I'll join you, and then I'll go straight home. Do you mind?
To me, Andy Stewart was just part and parcel of growing up as a wee guy. Every Hogmanay, I can rarely listen to Andy Stewart without almost smelling the froth from my dad's Cairney tartan export, because they would be the parties as a wee boy. You'd get a wee fly drink at your dad's fresh can of beer, and invariably it would be Andy Stewart that was on in the background.
They all fly outside and they all mother kisses her son.
We used to be allowed to go to bed and then get up and watch the Hogmanay show after we'd had a bit of a sleep, and stay up for a fizzy drink and watch him on television, and that's probably the earliest memory I have.
He wasn't really a family man, was he? Well, he had a big enough family. I think he had 5 kids.
Yeah, but you know what I mean when I say that? It wasn't one for being with the family all the time, although he was there, obviously, a few times.
Yes, Jack.
There are 5 daughters and 1 son.
That's right, yes.
And proud of their dad, no doubt.
I never really asked them. It's not as, you know, you've heard of Scots love. You know, we don't go about showing, you know, asking, you know, are you proud of me? Nor do they say, we're proud of you.
Was he a good dad? Yes, when he was there. A lot of the time he wasn't there. So, you know, that's not such a good dad. So it was sort of like balancing out.
My dad was away all the time, all through our childhood. My dad was away from the family home. He used to write to us all. We'd get our blue air mails through, and it was quite nice, really, because his writing was so bad that we had to spend weeks literally deciphering what he said. I think it was just what Dad did. That was his job. And people used to ask what it's like having a famous father. We didn't know anything different.
Many of Andy's children and grandchildren have followed in his footsteps onto the stage.
There was 5 of us within 6.5 years. So there was Tara, Andrew, Debbie, Lindsay and Melanie. And then a big gap of 14 years and my little sister Magdalene was born.
I think I would have been a dancer, whatever, because my mother was absolutely determined that was what I would do. She decided I was going to be a ballet dancer very early on.
I wasn't really interested in acting to start with. You know, the stage and variety was what I wanted to do first, yeah.
I used to love singing, and I still do. And when I was 16, he was working at Ayr, in the Ayr Gaiety, and he asked if I wanted to go along and sing a spot, so I did, just for a couple of shows there, and that was really the start of it. That's what I really wanted to do, I thought, at that time. Quite a few of the grandchildren are entertainers.
I'm in a band called White Heath. I'm not sure if I would say that it's in the blood, you know, some people would say that these things are, but I think it's probably more to do with the fact that he was such a huge presence and sort of influence in a way on as an elder statesman in the family that's led to so many of his children and grandchildren. You know, there's lots of grandchildren. I think probably half or more of them, you know, dance, sing, make music, act. So I think that, you know, he's sort of paved the way for that being an accepted thing to do.
Oh, it's nice to be a grandpa when you're getting the kind of old, for there's funny bairns to cuddle and there's stories to be told.
We were all conscious as time passed that Dad, his punishing schedule, which it really was taking its toll, and often he had spells in hospital. But he, although he would pay lip service to retiring and to taking it easy, he only had to be asked to do something, and he was right there.
Leaving hospital early often to go and start working again, never giving himself a long enough time for recuperation.
I remember going to visit him and my granny in their house in Arbroath when I was quite young. I remembered just spending time with him in the house, just chatting and having a laugh. And I remember quite often when we went to visit, he was in quite sort of poor health, quite often. But I remember sort of being told, go and see him upstairs, go and say hi. And when I went up, he was always, no matter how ill he was always just completely sparkling and life and soul and just great to be around.
I did hear that when Andy was very, very ill indeed, he was tubes up his nose, I mean, terribly ill and in hospital. And he had a show to do. He'd get up, pull out all the tubes and things and go and do the show. That's how daft performers are.
Andy retired from regular touring in the 1980s and was surprised by a public campaign in 1989 to re-release one of his earliest records.
It is the most happening record at the moment. This is Andy Stewart. Donald, where's your trousers?
I've just come down from the ale of Skye.
I just can't believe this. I said, it's quite flabbergasting. I said, my flabber has never been so gasted, in fact. I just can't believe this is happening to me.
I love it because it's the only record of its kind. The atmosphere on it is so good, it's so funny, and it's such an uplifting record.
By the 1990s, despite poor health, Andy continued to fulfil periodic concert and charity commitments.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound.
One typical occasion was in 1993, when Andy was asked to star at a charity event at the Usher Hall in Edinburgh.
That evening, we sat in a dressing room for ages and ages talking, and it was the longest and the deepest conversation I had with him. And I really warmed to the guy a lot on that occasion. I was shocked by how he looked.
The Usher Hall came for us to appear at, and we knew it was Andy who was the star of the show, but we didn't know how many people were going to be in the show. It was a huge show.
And of course we all knew that he'd been ill for ages and been warned by the doctors to stop touring. And people used to say to me, why does he keep doing that? He's ill, he knows he's ill, he obviously doesn't need the money. why does he keep to it? I said, because that's who he is. That's what he is. You know, there's no way he can just stop. You can't do it. But anyway, we did the show, and Andy went on as top of the bill, absolutely slaughtered them. Absolutely slaughtered them. And he total dynamism and energy, gave him 101%. We picked up the paper in the morning. He died a few hours later, went home to bed and died. It was quite a shock.
Performing made him more satisfied than not, so he would have been very frustrated if he couldn't have gone and done it when he promised to. And that's what kept him driven to perform when he said he would, yes.
It wasn't a complete shock, actually, at all. Far from it. It was the end of a long kind of anticipation.
There was always this sense that we knew that his time was limited, really. He'd had 2 bypass operations, and nobody really would have presumed to try and tell him what to do.
I was in New Zealand when it happened, and it broke my heart, of course, because I was so sorry that his total promise was never realized. Of course, his superficial promise as an entertainer was immediately recognized. His skill as an actor was there in those performances, but he would have given Scotland another dimension to the character actor status. I know he would have done. And who knows, his writing might have extended, and he might have written his own play. If he got to my hoary age that I am now, he might have written a masterpiece. But in himself, he was a masterpiece, because he was a total work of art. From his wee snub nose till his cheeky little voice, he was a work of art. And I'm glad to have known him.
I return to the fields of glory, where the green grass and flowers grow, and the wind softly sings the story of the brave lads of long ago.
My dad was, I think, very much epitomizes a particular time in our social history. And there's part of me that's really proud of that, but part of me that wants to defend what is sometimes seen as a kind of Kilt and Heather sort of image.
Andy Stewart, philosopher, singer, impersonator, comedian, songwriter, genius.
We're very, very proud to have known him and to have worked with him.
Mm-hmm.
He was just a marvellous entertainer.
Sure was. Andy.
Warm, generous, flawed, you know, and no doubt I think his drive into the theatre was too encompassing to be entirely good for your health.
Sleep in peace, now the battles
We've an uplifting film to ease you into the new year. Stay where you are for the Oscar-winning animated adventure Up next on BBC One Scotland.